I recently came across a quote by the English author and Anglican priest, William Ralph Inge. He said, "The nations which have put mankind most in their debt have been the small states, Israel, Athens, Florence, and Elizabethan England." This appears to be particularly true when it comes to our cultural heritage. A significant number of our greatest painters, poets, and prophets have come from small states. When Greece was split into countless little city-states, she produced Aristotle, Sophocles, and Thucydides. When Italy was split into countless little principalities, she produced Dante, Michelangelo, and Raphael. When Germany was split into countless little kingdoms, she produced Goethe, Kant, Beethoven, and Bach. And when England was a small and insignificant country of only 4 million people, she produced the world's greatest dramatist, Shakespeare. This begs the question, is there a relationship between the size of the state and cultural productivity? Do small states provide more fertile ground for genius? And does globalization lead to cultural decay? I will try and answer all of these questions in this video. In his book, The Breakdown of Nations, Leopold Kohr argues that small states are more culturally productive than large states. Whenever small state regions are united into the formidable frame of great powers, they cease to be centers of culture. To quote him, "All the great empires of antiquity, including the famous Roman Empire, have not created a fraction of the culture in all the thousands of years of their combined existence which the minuscule, ever-feuding Greek city-states produced in a few decades." Kohr's quote appears to be validated by the testimony of history. In that quote, he mentions the example of ancient Greece. Greece made her greatest contribution to our civilization when she was divided into hundreds of city-states. The greatest contributor of all of these city-states was Athens. Around 430 BC, Athens is estimated to have had a population of around 230,000 people, including slaves. This tiny city-state produced architects, sculptors, and dramatists who remain unsurpassed to the present day. When Alexander conquered Greece and merged the little city-states into an empire, she ceased to be culturally productive. This fact is discussed in Kathleen Freeman's book, Greek City-States. It was the small unit, the independent city-state, that produced such intellectual giants as Thucydides and Aristophanes, Heraclitus and Parmenides. If these conditions were not in part responsible, how is it that philosophy, science, political thought, and the best of the literary arts all perish with the downfall of the city-state system in 322 BC? With the exception of Epicurus, the Hellenic period produced no great philosophers, poets, or painters. It did produce Archimedes, but he is remembered for his contribution to technology and science rather than art and culture. Something similar can be observed if we look at the Roman Empire. Rome produced many incredible poets and philosophers, but the chief accomplishments of Rome were technical and social, not cultural. The Roman Empire is primarily remembered for its roads, aqueducts, lawgivers, and military commanders. Famous works of Roman art are simply replicas of Greek works. Indeed, Roman art and culture is largely an imitation of Greek art and culture. But perhaps Kohr's point is best demonstrated by Italy and Germany. The fragmented states of Bavaria, Baden, Frankfurt, Hesse, Saxony, and Nuremberg produced remarkable figures like Goethe, Nietzsche, Wagner, Kant, Beethoven, and Bach. Since unification, Germany has not produced a single artist or thinker of comparable significance. Unified Italy gave rise to Futurism, an artistic movement that celebrated speed, violence, and industrial technology. But even the greatest members of that movement do not measure up to the lesser-known artists from Renaissance Florence. Here is what Kohr has to say about the artistic legacy of unified Italy and Germany. As unified empires, both Italy and Germany continued to boast of the monuments of a great civilization on their soil. But neither of them produced these. What they did produce were a bunch of unimaginative rulers and generals, Hitlers and Mussolinis. They too had artistic ambitions and wanted to embellish their capital cities But instead of hundreds of capitals, there were now only two, Rome and Berlin. And instead of thousands of artists, there were now only two, Hitler and Mussolini. And their prime concern was not the creation of art, but the construction of the pedestal on which they themselves might stand. This pedestal was war. There appears to be a relationship between the size of the state and cultural productivity. Small states appear to be more intellectually creative than large ones. When the small state is subsumed by a large one, it ceases to be culturally productive. What might explain this? There are, as far as I can tell, three main arguments. The first and most convincing argument is that large states drain the creative energy of their people. The second argument is that large states homogenize taste and in so doing destroy creativity. The last argument is that small states divert aggressive energy towards creative ends. I will deal with each of these arguments in isolation. Nietzsche was born in Prussian Saxony, one of the 39 German-speaking states that existed prior to unification. During his lifetime, he watched Bismarck transform these states into the German Reich. Originally, Nietzsche supported Bismarck, but he eventually became critical of the Iron Chancellor. In an essay called What the Germans Lack, Nietzsche wrote, "Even a rapid estimate shows that it is not only obvious that German culture is declining, but that there is sufficient reason for that. In the end, no one can spend more than he has. That is true of an individual. It is true of a people. If one spends oneself for power politics, for economics, world trade, parliamentarianism, and military interests, then one will not have anything left for any other direction. Culture and the state are antagonists. One lives off the other. One thrives at the expense of the other." In other words, German culture was declining because the energy of the German people was being drained by the state. The German Reich was consuming practically all the available energy of its citizens. There was, therefore, little energy left for cultural pursuits. According to Core, this applies to all large states, not just the German Reich. Large states are extremely complicated. An immense amount of effort and cooperation is required just to keep them functioning. This is because simple tasks, when done at a large enough scale, become extremely complicated. To appreciate this point, it is helpful to consider an analogy. Imagine a school that has only 200 students. In such a school, the principal knows every student's name. He can get a holistic view of the school simply by walking around the grounds. Now imagine a school with 2,000 students. In such a school, it becomes impossible for anybody to have a holistic image of the operation. Instead, you need specialists, data analysts to track student performance, counselors to address individual needs, and an array of administrative staff to manage logistics. Seemingly simple tasks, such as monitoring attendance, require sophisticated systems and multiple layers of management. According to Core, something analogous happens in the large state. The business of government becomes extremely complicated. A huge amount of energy needs to be diverted into the channel of bureaucracy, logistics, and social services. To quote him, "It is no longer the great poet or great architect who reaps society's principal honours, but the socially useful mechanic, the organizer, or what is so appropriately called the engineer of human relations." In other words, large states reward people who can do things at scale. A man can rise to the highest rank in society by mastering the arts of organization and logistics. To illustrate this point, it is helpful to consider an example. In a small state, a man responsible for selling groceries is unlikely to brush shoulders with the elite. In a large state, there is almost no limit to how much power and prestige he can attain. Some of the most wealthy and powerful people in the large state sell groceries. Some of the most wealthy and powerful people in the large state run plumbing businesses. Some of the most wealthy and powerful people in the large state are in the garbage disposal industry. To quote Core once again, "With modern society so completely absorbed by the task of surviving Physically, the choking crowd conditions it has created, it is not surprising that it should consider the achievements in the fields of the social sciences, technology, hygiene, and so forth as the ultimate accomplishment of civilization. The large state is utilitarian by nature. It is primarily concerned with efficiency and functionality. How many tons of butter are being produced per year? How many houses are being built? How many miles of road are being laid? These are the questions that concern the large state. To quote Core, instead of Baroque fountains wasting precious water or statues wasting precious metals, we now build memorial hospitals, memorial parks, and memorial community halls. Everything has to be subordinated to social needs. In short, the bureaucratic and logistical demands of the large state drain the people of their cultural vitality. Everything needs to be subordinated to social needs. A defining characteristic of large states is centralization. In the large state, there is a capital city that is at the center of decision making. It determines political, economic, and cultural life. Aspiring artists travel to this central hub to study at the best schools and universities, and they adopt the prevailing trends and fashions of the capital. This leads to a homogenization of culture. One style begins to prevail over all others. There is no longer a Florentine style or a Venetian style, but only a Roman style. The artist is expected to conform to a uniform standard of taste that is determined by the capital. This reduces the diversity of artistic output and erodes creativity. To appreciate this point, it is helpful to look at architecture. The prevailing architectural style of our time is called the international style. This style prevails in every major city in the world. The skylines of Bangkok, Beijing, and Bogota are all dominated by large glass boxes in the international style. This style is taught in every architectural school in the world. It claims, as its name implies, to be a universal aesthetic, and yet it is universally disliked. By attempting to appeal to everyone, it ends up appealing to no one. This is true not only of architecture, but of art in general. People who cater to a broad and diverse audience typically produce bland and generic art. The common man is forgotten, even by his own family. His great-grandchildren know very little about him, but the great man is remembered by his people throughout the ages. Sculptors immortalize him in stone, and historians talk about his deeds long after he is dead. Typically, the great man is the military man. Our cities are filled with statues of military commanders, and countless books are written about their exploits. The quest for immortality has driven countless statesmen to raise armies and conquer territories. War is the most common way for the statesman to achieve immortality. According to Core, this path to historical eminence is blocked in the small state. The leader of the small state cannot raise a large army or conquer his neighbours. He cannot, therefore, achieve immortality through war and conquest. To quote Core, he has no other way of sneaking into the coveted pages of history than by applying his intelligence to man's higher aspirations. In other words, he has to become a patron of the arts and build beautiful things that will outlast him. He gives the example of Wolf Dietrich, the Prince of Salzburg, who turned his tiny state of less than 200,000 inhabitants into one of the world's architectural gems. To quote him, with no chance of enlarging his possessions, his aggressiveness was diverted into the construction of a magnificent Renaissance cathedral whose facade became the incomparable backdrop of every man, the still flourishing central attraction of the Salzburg festivals. Overarching theories of history are interesting but often wrong. History is far too complex to be explained by a single theory. The idea that culture declines when the state becomes too large is interesting but not universally true. For instance, the golden era of Russian literature occurred in the 19th century when the Russian state was extremely large. This period saw the emergence of literary giants like Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, and Chekhov. Nevertheless, I believe that cause theory can help us understand the cultural sterility of our own time. The global American empire has drained the world of its creative energy, homogenized taste, and left very little room for creative expression. Under our current conditions, it's hard to imagine anything of real cultural worth being produced. If you like this video, please subscribe. Thanks for watching.